Welcome to True Echo, where real power speaks through stories that shatter stereotypes, break silence, and change lives. Today's episode is not just about business or betrayal, it's about what happens when prejudice underestimates purpose. When arrogance collides with excellence. When a black woman walks into a room full of judgment, and walks out as CEO. This is the story of Michelle Reed. The marble floor of Callister and Rose's corporate headquarters gleamed under Michelle Reed's heels as she stepped through the front doors, her movements calm and confident, each step a quiet declaration of presence. Her tailored navy blazer hugged her form with elegance, paired with a crisp white blouse and a pencil skirt that fell just below her knees. In her hand, she carried a black leather briefcase, sleek, professional, and containing the contract for a game-changing $100 million merger signed only 48 hours earlier. That deal, though still confidential, would redefine the future of this entire company. Michelle had been preparing for this moment for months. Her years in private equity and strategy consulting had led to this very opportunity, a chance to shape the future of one of the most powerful firms in the country. And now, as she approached the receptionist's desk at 8:44 a.m., 16 minutes ahead of the pivotal boardroom strategy meeting on the 32nd floor, she wore her professionalism like armor. The receptionist, a young white woman with flawless curls and AirPods in her ears, didn't even glance up. Michelle offered a warm, confident smile and spoke clearly. "Good morning. I'm Michelle Reed. I have a 9 o'clock meeting on the 32nd floor." No response. Michelle waited, then added more firmly, "Could you check the guest list? I should be listed for the boardroom meeting." Still nothing. Teresa, the woman's name tag revealed, kept typing, her manicured fingers fluttering across the keyboard as though Michelle was simply background noise. The air began to thicken. A few other employees passed by, offering curious glances but no words. Michelle straightened her posture, her gaze never leaving the woman in front of her. She knew this moment. She had lived it in 1,000 different forms: polite disregard, subtle gatekeeping, veiled dismissal. Finally, Teresa sighed theatrically and spoke in a monotone voice. "Please step aside and wait." Michelle checked her watch. 8:47 a.m. She wasn't just being stalled, she was being tested. And that's when a voice broke the tension, deep and hardened with false authority. "Excuse me. The service entrance is around the back." Michelle turned and faced the speaker. A tall, heavy-set white man in his late 50s stood near the front pillars, his dark security uniform adorned with a nameplate, Frank Kinley, head of security. He eyed her like she didn't belong in the building, let alone at an executive meeting. "I'm not here for deliveries," Michelle said, keeping her voice even. "I'm Michelle Reed. I have a meeting upstairs at 9. Frank squinted as though inspecting something suspect. "You're not authorized. All guests for the 32nd floor are cleared in advance. Step to the back while I verify." Her briefcase weighed heavy in her hand. It held the merger papers that would soon redefine Callister and Rose's future, and here she was, treated like an outsider in her own house. "I've already been invited," Michelle said calmly. "By Mr. Calloway's office." Frank didn't budge. "30 years I've been here," he said proudly. "Mistakes like that don't happen." Michelle felt heat rise in her chest. Not from embarrassment, but from the sting of being underestimated again. "Then it should be easy to confirm. Go ahead and call." Frank narrowed his eyes and reached for his radio with theatrical slowness, clearly trying to provoke a reaction. Michelle didn't flinch. He walked off, muttering something into the radio. She didn't move an inch. Not out of defiance, but because she refused to let people like Frank decide where she did or didn't belong. Then came the second act of humiliation. 3 sharply dressed men exited the elevator bank, laughing until their eyes locked on Michelle. One of them, a tall man with slick-back blonde hair and a perfectly tailored pinstripe suit, stepped forward. Greg Saunders. Director of Strategy. Arrogant. Entitled. Dangerous in the way mediocre men often are when they hold unchecked power. He eyed Michelle and sneered. "Wow," he said, gesturing toward her briefcase, "did someone start allowing food deliveries to the exec floor?" His colleagues chuckled. Michelle didn't blink. "I'm not a delivery person. I'm Michelle Reed. I'm here for the 9 a.m. meeting." Greg tilted his head, amusement dancing in his eyes. "That's funny. I reviewed the guest list myself." "No, Michelle Reed." Michelle replied, "Double-check. I'm here on invitation from Mr. Calloway." Greg's eyes flashed momentary confusion, but he buried it under a smirk. "Let me make this real simple, Michelle. You're not getting upstairs. So unless you've got a mop and a uniform, you're wasting your time." Michelle looked him in the eye and said nothing. "Not yet." Greg turned to walk away, calling over his shoulder, "Security will handle it." But Michelle didn't move. Because the truth was, Greg hadn't seen the internal memo. He didn't know who Michelle really was. He didn't know about the $100 million merger she'd just secured. Or that she wasn't just attending the meeting, she was about to lead it. What happened next would silence every voice that had doubted her. And it would begin with one woman walking into a war of arrogance and walking out with a company in her hands. The elevator doors whispered shut behind Greg Saunders and his entourage, but their sneering laughter still echoed in Michelle's ears like smoke in a sealed room. Her jaw clenched. Not from shame, but from the sheer restraint it took not to throw her credentials in their faces right then and there. But no. That wasn't her style. Michelle knew something far more powerful than outbursts, patience and proof. At 8:52 a.m., the watch on her wrist chimed softly. Just 8 minutes until the boardroom doors on the 32nd floor would open for the most critical meeting in the company's recent history, where Michelle wasn't just an invited guest. She was the architect of the entire meeting's agenda. And still, she stood there, unmoved and unwelcomed. That's when a voice rang out from the hallway behind her. Sharp heels clicked in rapid rhythm, slicing through the thick silence. "Ms. Reed. Thank God you're still here." Michelle turned to see Jennifer Brooks, the board's senior executive assistant, striding toward her with a face flushed in a mixture of panic and fury. Jennifer, a seasoned black woman in her late 40s, professionally dressed in dark gray, looked mortified. "I tried to call down as soon as I saw the check-in hadn't been logged. Teresa didn't respond to my messages. I'm so sorry." She glared at the reception desk, where Teresa now sat frozen, eyes wide with sudden fear. Jennifer didn't stop to scold her. She turned directly to Michelle. "You have your briefing folder, right?" Michelle held up her briefcase. "Everything's ready." Jennifer nodded briskly and turned on her heel. "Let's go. You're 10 minutes away from changing this entire company." They walked past the glass security barrier without another word. Frank Kinley, the head of security, returned just in time to see the two women walking away together, his face contorted in confusion, then recognition, then dread. His radio fell silent in his hand. He said nothing. Michelle didn't bother to look back. As the private elevator ascended toward the executive floor, Jennifer leaned in. "Greg doesn't know. He's been strutting around all week like he owns the place. I can't wait to see his face when you walk into that room." Michelle gave a tight smile. "That's not why I'm here. This isn't about revenge." Jennifer raised an eyebrow. "No. But justice doesn't always come in rage. Sometimes it wears a navy blazer and brings contracts worth $100 million. The elevator pinged softly, and the doors opened onto the hushed, glass-walled executive corridor. Immediately, conversation stopped. Michelle stepped out, and every senior manager turned to look. Some gawked openly. A few had the decency to look confused. One or two, clearly aware of the merger in process, began to put the pieces together. But Greg? Greg was already seated in the glass boardroom, gesturing broadly, clearly holding court. The moment he saw Michelle, his smile dropped. For a second, just a second, the cracks in his arrogance showed. Jennifer placed a firm hand on Michelle's back, gently guiding her forward. You go in first. You deserve the moment. Michelle stepped into the boardroom, and every executive turned to her. She didn't say a word at first. She opened her briefcase, pulled out the red-sealed envelope from Mr. Calloway's office, and placed it on the long, gleaming walnut table. I'm Michelle Reed, she said clearly. I was appointed by Mr. Calloway and the Global Investment Council to preside over today's strategy meeting as senior advisor, and co-lead of the $100 million acquisition currently underway. Silence fell like a dropped pin in a cathedral. Then Greg stood up so fast his chair screeched back. No, he said, pointing an accusatory finger. This is some kind of mistake. You. He stopped himself, realizing what he was about to say. Michelle tilted her head, calm as ever. Yes, Greg. He looked around the room. None of the others came to his defense. Not now. Not when they saw the seal. Not when they realized what was happening. Michelle added, would you like to review the documents for yourself? Greg snatched the envelope from the table and yanked it open. As his eyes scanned the letter, color drained from his face. He was silent for a moment too long. Jennifer folded her arms behind Michelle. Still think she's delivering lunch, Greg? Greg set the letter down, lips tight, then forced a chuckle. Fine. You've got a seat at the table. But don't expect to run the room. You're still not. Michelle cut in, her voice like a scalpel. Qualified? Authorized? Or is there another word you were about to say? Greg's mouth clamped shut. Michelle leaned forward slightly. Let me be absolutely clear. I'm not here because I asked to be. I'm here because I earned it. Because I closed the deal your entire department failed to negotiate for 6 months. And because Mr. Calloway, and the council, trust me to steer this company into the future. She looked around the room, meeting every eye. I'm not here for a seat. I am the table. No one dared speak. Greg, flushed and fuming, sat back down, seething silently. But his eyes said it all, he had just realized he'd picked the wrong woman to underestimate. Michelle turned to Jennifer. Let's begin the meeting. And with that, Michelle took the seat at the head of the table. Michelle sat with quiet authority at the head of the gleaming conference table, her posture upright, her fingers neatly folded over the strategy briefing. No one moved. The room seemed to hold its collective breath as the woman who had just been mistaken for a delivery worker now commanded the attention of the most powerful executives at Callister and Rose. Greg Saunders sat to her left, shoulders stiff, his smirk replaced with a tight, forced neutrality. But beneath his cold stare was a storm of resentment, confusion, and fear. Michelle looked at the clock. 9:01 a.m. Let's proceed, she said, her voice steady and sure. I'll begin by walking us through the financial implications of the merger agreement signed this week with Aston and Burns Technologies. Aston and Burns, one of the most coveted acquisitions in the market, had been circling this firm for months, but none of the top brass had been able to close the deal. Except Michelle. As she spoke, presenting clear metrics, projected ROI, integration strategy, and personnel impact, the room fell into focused silence. Every executive who had doubted her earlier now found themselves scribbling notes and nodding. By 9:15, Michelle had laid out the entire merger roadmap. By 9:25, she had refuted every known objection with data. By 9:30, she had earned something far more valuable than applause, she had earned their full attention. But Greg wasn't done. He leaned forward, putting on a polite mask, and asked with a veneer of curiosity, and how exactly were you able to close this deal when our internal teams couldn't even secure a meeting? Michelle didn't blink. Relationships, she said simply. And credibility. Qualities that take time to earn but can be destroyed in a single meeting, or a single insult. Greg flushed, his ears burning. Michelle continued. You see, when the Aston and Burns team met with me, they didn't ask what I wore to work. They asked what I brought to the table. And I brought a vision that went beyond ego or tradition. I brought respect. A few executives around the table shifted uncomfortably. The subtext wasn't subtle. Michelle let the silence breathe. Then she added, this deal is projected to increase Callister and Rose's annual valuation by 19% within 2 fiscal quarters. And I plan to ensure every department, from the board to the mailroom, understands how we're going to get there. Greg scoffed under his breath. Michelle turned to him, her tone now cool steel. Do you have something to add, Mr. Saunders? Greg stood, defiance simmering. Yes. Actually, I do. Every head turned. The tension snapped back to full alert. I still believe this entire situation is irregular, he said. No disrespect to you, Michelle. Michelle cut him off smoothly. You've already made your disrespect quite clear, Greg. He faltered. This kind of corporate leapfrog over established leadership protocols, it undermines trust. It erodes discipline. You mean it disrupts entitlement, Michelle corrected. And for the first time, maybe, the system is working exactly as it should. Greg's fists curled slightly at his sides. Before he could speak again, the glass boardroom doors opened. In walked Robert Calloway himself, CEO Emeritus, co-founder, and legend in the firm's long history. Silver-haired, regal in presence, and walking with the quiet confidence of a man who understood power and humility. Good morning, he said as he entered, the room rising to its feet. Michelle stood as well, but Calloway walked straight to her. Michelle, he said warmly, extending a hand. You've exceeded every expectation I had. And I had high ones. Michelle smiled, accepting his handshake. Thank you, Mr. Calloway. He turned to the rest of the room. I came today for one reason. To confirm that the Global Investment Council has officially approved Michelle Reed as interim CEO of Callister and Rose. She now holds full executive authority. The room gasped audibly. Even Jennifer, who knew, inhaled in stunned pride. Greg's lips parted but no sound came. Calloway continued, let me be clear, this decision wasn't made last week. It was made a month ago. Michelle's performance, her strategic clarity, her integrity, she earned this. And some of you, quite frankly, just earned a reckoning. He paused, then looked directly at Greg. Mr. Saunders, you may take the rest of the day to consider whether your future here aligns with our values. I've reviewed the security footage from this morning. Greg's face drained to the color of ash. Michelle, Calloway said, please continue. With that, he turned and left the room, leaving only stunned silence in his wake. Michelle sat down again, turned another page in her packet, and said calmly, now, let's talk about restructuring the leadership review process. And not one soul in that room dared speak over her again. The room remained suspended in disbelief long after Robert Calloway's footsteps had faded into the hallway. Greg Saunders sat motionless, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, jaw clenched as if to keep from saying something he knew could cost him everything. The once untouchable director of strategy now looked smaller, no longer the loudest man in the room, but the quietest. Michelle Reed, however, wasted no time. Let's continue, she said, flipping to the next page in the strategy binder. Her voice, firm and composed, carried the tone of someone who had waited her entire life to be heard, but had prepared to speak for far longer. As part of the merger transition plan, we'll be evaluating not just operational efficiency, but leadership integrity. That includes anonymous feedback from employees across all departments, up, down, and laterally. There was a murmur of unease. Greg opened his mouth to speak, but Michelle kept going, not missing a beat. These 360-degree evaluations will directly impact bonus structures, promotion eligibility, and yes, continued employment. Every single manager will be held accountable for how they lead, not just what they deliver. An executive from marketing leaned forward, cautiously. Ms. Reed, these are radical changes. We've never operated with that level of transparency. Michelle finished for him. Yes. That's the point. No one argued. Instead, heads bowed over their binders, pens started scratching notes, and the old order of things quietly, visibly began to shift. The silence that followed wasn't fear. It was reflection. The sound of egos deflating and minds beginning to open. Michelle paused for a moment, allowing the new reality to settle in. Then she turned toward the boardroom screen and tapped a button on the control panel. The screen flickered, then displayed two headshots, Teresa, the receptionist, and Frank Kinley, the head of security. Both photos bore red banners at the bottom that read, "Terminated." A wave of stunned silence swept the room. Michelle faced the table. This morning, these two individuals engaged in conduct that violated our core principles, those of respect, impartiality, and professionalism. Their actions may have seemed small to some of you. Dismissive behavior. Gatekeeping. But those small cracks reveal foundational weaknesses. She let that linger. Then, calmly, they've been relieved of their duties effective immediately. One executive raised a hand. Is this really necessary? They're not high-ranking employees. Michelle's eyes sharpened, her tone never rising, but her authority unmistakable. That's the problem. For too long, we've tolerated inappropriate behavior at the entry level because it seemed minor. But those so-called small moments build the culture your senior team ends up reflecting. The rot doesn't start at the top, it seeps upward from complacency below. No one dared argue further. Michelle closed the screen and leaned forward, her hands clasped. The days of passive tolerance are over. Every employee, from the front desk to the boardroom, will be treated with dignity, or shown the door. The room remained utterly still. Everyone felt it, a shift not just in leadership, but in accountability. Then, without warning, Greg stood. I have something to say. Michelle didn't stop him. She only watched. Greg took a breath, looking around the room at the colleagues who once hung on his every word. Now, they looked away. I let my pride blind me, he said stiffly. I've led by fear and entitlement, not by example. This morning, I said things I now regret. Deeply. No applause. No nods. Only silence. Then Greg turned to Michelle. You didn't deserve any of it. And I don't expect forgiveness. But you deserve my apology. You earned this role. And I was too arrogant to see it. Michelle studied him. His words were hesitant, but sincere. This wasn't a man groveling. It was a man beginning to realize the damage he'd done, not just to others, but to himself. Thank you, Michelle said quietly. Greg's eyes flickered with something unfamiliar, humility. I'll step down, he added. Today. Effective immediately. Gasps rose. A few hands went to mouths. Greg Saunders, the man who once ruled the strategy floor with smug grins and veiled threats, was walking away. Michelle stood. That's your decision to make. And I respect it. Greg gave a final nod and walked to the door. But before he left, he turned back one last time. For what it's worth. I hope this place becomes everything you're fighting for. The door closed behind him. And just like that, one of the last pillars of the old regime collapsed. Michelle exhaled slowly, grounding herself. This was only the beginning. Turning to the stunned board, she said, now. Let's talk about rebuilding this company from the inside out. The boardroom was no longer a place of resistance. Now, it buzzed with the quiet energy of reckoning, a space where transformation wasn't just possible but inevitable. Michelle stood at the whiteboard, writing 3 words in bold black ink. Respect. Transparency. Fairness. These are not slogans, she said, turning to face the executives. They are policy. They are our new standard. And they will be enforced. There was no applause. No polite smiles. Just solemn nods. Because everyone in that room knew, this wasn't theater. It was the new reality. Michelle clicked the remote and a detailed slideshow appeared on the screen behind her. Starting next week, all leadership at Callister and Rose, from department heads to senior managers, will undergo intensive ethics and equity training. Not a single person is exempt. Murmurs floated through the room. A grizzled finance executive raised his hand. Ms. Reed, some of us have been in this company for decades. Are we really expected to be judged by anonymous feedback? Michelle nodded. Yes. Especially you. The room fell quiet again. She continued, you've been here for decades, yes, but culture doesn't reward tenure when it forgets empathy. That's how we got here in the first place. Another executive asked, cautiously, what if the feedback is weaponized? What if someone holds a grudge? Michelle didn't hesitate. All feedback will be aggregated, verified, and reviewed by a neutral third-party compliance team. This isn't about punishing personalities. It's about exposing patterns. She let her words hang in the air. Then, softly, if you treat your team with fairness and respect, you have nothing to worry about. Silence. Then nods. Fewer defensive stares now. More awareness. Michelle walked back to her seat and picked up a small black folder. Let me show you what fairness can look like. She opened it and passed around printed copies of a promotion recommendation she had personally signed that morning. Rachel Evans, Michelle said, her voice warm with pride. She's a junior analyst. Been here 3 years. Overlooked by every manager because she's quiet and introverted. Last week, she gave me a 12-page analysis on the merger that outperformed the entire strategy team. She smiled. She starts Monday as a senior project lead. There was an audible reaction around the table. Several executives glanced at one another, clearly realizing they had missed someone in their ranks, someone worth seeing. Michelle closed the folder. We have more talent buried in the lower ranks of this company than we've ever realized. Starting today, that ends. A soft knock came at the door. Jennifer stepped in, carrying a sleek silver laptop. Apologies for the interruption, Ms. Reed, but I thought you'd want to see this. She placed the laptop in front of Michelle, who clicked play on the video already queued. It was Greg Saunders. But not in a boardroom. He stood in a modest gymnasium, surrounded by young people, mostly black and brown teens. The video appeared to be from a small community event, a youth leadership workshop. Michelle adjusted the volume. In the video, Greg looked down the camera with eyes more human than ever before. I'm not proud of who I was at Callister and Rose, he said. I misused my position. I judged people based on appearance, on background. And I was wrong. Gasps rippled through the room. The same man who'd once stormed through these halls like a king was now, changed. Greg continued, but someone gave me a chance to reflect. Michelle Reed didn't humiliate me. She gave me an option to walk away and choose better. That's why I'm here today, helping kids understand how business really works, and how not to become the kind of person I used to be. The room was frozen. Greg's voice cracked in the final seconds of the clip. I used to think leadership was about being right. Michelle showed me, it's about being good. Michelle paused the video and looked around the table. No one spoke. A few had tears in their eyes. She said softly, people can change. But only if the culture invites them to. That's what we're building here. Jennifer added quietly, the video already has over 100,000 views. It's going viral. Michelle nodded but didn't look surprised. She turned back to the board. Redemption is real. But only if we're brave enough to confront the truth. We cannot pretend anymore. We must look our culture in the face and demand better. She took a slow breath, letting it all settle. Then she said, Callister and Rose won't just be known for what we do in the market. We will be known for how we treat the people who make that market possible. And at last, for the first time all morning, the room responded with something genuine. Applause. Not forced. Not obligatory. But born of clarity, and maybe even hope. The applause faded, but something powerful remained in the room, silence, but not the kind that comes from fear or resistance. This was the quiet of contemplation, of gears turning in minds that had only ever moved in one direction before. Michelle Reed could feel the change, not in words, but in posture, in the way shoulders softened, eyes met hers without challenge, and pens began scribbling not defensively, but with genuine engagement. She rose once more, pacing slowly in front of the massive window overlooking the city skyline. Below, the world buzzed on as usual, oblivious to the revolution happening 32 floors up. Michelle turned back to the room. Change doesn't happen in a single day. We won't solve decades of systemic culture overnight. But it starts here. Right now. With action. She clicked the projector again, revealing a 3-phase roadmap titled, Transformation Framework, From Legacy to Leadership. Phase 1, Accountability. Phase 2, Empowerment. Phase 3, Renewal. Phase 1 begins immediately, Michelle said. That includes implementing anonymous surveys across every department, reviewing complaints that were previously ignored or silenced, and, this is critical, hosting open listening forums where junior staff can speak freely, with no fear of retaliation. One of the HR executives shifted in her chair. Do you really believe employees will be honest in an environment like this? Most are conditioned to stay quiet. Michelle nodded. I know they're scared. I've been that employee. I've walked into meetings where I was the only black woman in the room, and had my ideas claimed, my voice dismissed, my presence questioned. That's why we're removing that fear, through policy, not just promises. Jennifer stepped forward with a stack of folders. We've already started collecting pre-transition feedback. Some of it is painful to read. She handed copies to the executives around the table. Michelle watched their faces carefully as they opened them. She didn't need to read it again, she knew every line by heart. I had a team lead call me articulate after I presented. Like he was surprised I could speak. I've been passed over 5 times for promotion while training the people who got the job. My manager calls me girl in meetings. I'm 42. If I speak up, I'm angry. If I'm quiet, I'm uninvolved. There's no winning. The executive shifted uncomfortably. Michelle let the silence deepen. These aren't isolated incidents. They're systemic symptoms. And if you can read this and still think reform is optional, then you're part of the problem. No one argued. One senior VP, a quiet man in legal, finally spoke. I never saw any of this. Not because I didn't look, but because no one showed me. Michelle met his eyes. It's not enough to wait to be shown. We must choose to see. She tapped the screen again. Phase 2 starts in 4 weeks. That's when the empowerment initiatives begin. Leadership mentorships for employees of color, women, LGBTQ staff, people who've historically been sidelined. These programs will have teeth. Measurable outcomes. Promotions tied to merit, not networks. There were murmurs of approval this time. Another voice piped up, Sandra Chen, a newly promoted tech director. Are we also evaluating suppliers and partnerships through this lens? Michelle smiled. Yes. External vendors will now be vetted not just for price, but for values. Our dollars will speak our culture. Then she moved to the final slide. Phase 3, Renewal. This is where we become more than a company. We become a standard. A model for the industry. We'll publish our internal culture audit, publicly. No hiding behind PR teams. We'll show what we got right, and what we still need to fix. A collective breath moved through the room. It was bold. Unprecedented. But what if it backfires? Someone asked. Michelle nodded, understanding the fear. Then it means we're telling the truth. And truth is never a bad investment. She let the final slide linger for a moment longer, then clicked off the projector and stepped back toward the table. For those of you still unsure, she said softly, I'm not here to ruin what you built. I'm here to help it evolve. I don't want your job, I want your trust. Your belief. Your courage. And then, almost unexpectedly, she added, because I can't do this alone. A pause. Then, to her surprise, it was Sandra who stood first. I'll stand with you, she said. This place nearly broke me once. If we can make sure it doesn't do that to anyone else, then I'm all in. One by one, others followed. I'm in. You've got my support. Let's rebuild the right way. Only one chair remained still. The last holdout. A tall man in a charcoal suit, John Larch, the former interim COO, a quiet enabler of the old regime. He didn't stand. But his voice, when he spoke, carried weight. I underestimated you, Michelle, he said evenly. That won't happen again. I won't pretend I'm not shaken by how fast all of this is moving, but maybe that's the point. You've earned your seat at this table. You've earned our ears. He slowly stood. And I think, you're earning something rarer than both. Our respect. Michelle nodded, deeply. Thank you. And for the first time since the chaos of the morning began, the tension in the room eased. The foundations of Callister and Rose had cracked. But now, under Michelle's leadership, something stronger was taking root. A company not just building profits, but building people. 1 month later, the energy inside Callister and Rose was unlike anything the company had seen in decades. The marble floors still gleamed. The boardroom glass still shimmered. But what had changed, what had truly transformed, was the atmosphere. The tone. The pulse of the place. Where there was once hushed fear, now there was motion. Movement. Voices that had been silent were now speaking up. Doors that had always been closed were now cracked open. And at the center of it all was Michelle Reed. She never once retreated into a distant corner office. In fact, she often declined to use it at all. Instead, she walked the floors. Every floor. From the executive suite to the operations basement, she made it a point to stop by departments unannounced, smile at interns, speak directly to custodial staff, and ask, how's the culture treating you? She didn't just review reports, she listened. She didn't just restructure teams, she reimagined purpose. And people felt it. They responded. Rachel Evans, the quiet analyst Michelle had promoted, was now leading a cross-functional task force for the Aston and Burns integration. Her reports were so comprehensive, even rival firms were requesting consultation partnerships. In HR, a diverse leadership council was formed to ensure no policy moved forward without representation from the people it would affect most. And the anonymous feedback system? It had transformed the company overnight. Several managers who had long flown under the radar for toxic behavior were gently removed or retrained. Those who embraced growth were promoted faster than ever before. But Michelle's vision went beyond personnel. She introduced a full scholarship fund for underrepresented students pursuing business degrees, in partnership with 3 local universities. The program was named not after herself, but after her late mother, a public school teacher who always told her, never let them forget your worth. And she made sure no one else at Callister and Rose ever would. But perhaps the most surprising twist came on a cool Friday morning in the company auditorium. Hundreds of employees were gathered for an internal summit on leadership and integrity. Michelle stepped on stage with her usual quiet confidence and introduced a guest speaker. The crowd murmured as Greg Saunders walked into the light. He looked nothing like the man who once sneered in the boardroom. He wore a simple navy suit, no tie, and carried no ego. His eyes were focused. Humble. "I never thought I'd stand on this stage again," Greg began. "And I certainly never thought it would be to thank the woman I once tried to tear down." There were audible gasps. "But I'm not here to rehash what happened. I'm here to say this: Michelle Reed saved me, from myself." He paused, his voice thickening. "When she gave me the choice to resign, I left angry. Embarrassed. Ashamed. But instead of burying that shame, I sat with it. I examined it. And then I decided to do something with it." He looked out at the staff. "Today, I mentor young professionals from underprivileged backgrounds. I teach them not just how to build a business plan, but how to build character." Greg turned to Michelle. "You gave me the chance to choose redemption. And I'll spend the rest of my life honoring that gift." The room burst into applause. Genuine. Loud. And yes, emotional. Michelle stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Forgiveness isn't weakness," she said into the mic, "it's power. The power to choose a better story." And as they stood side by side, once enemies, now symbols of transformation, every person in that room understood, this was the new Callister and Rose. A place where mistakes didn't define you, growth did. Where dignity wasn't a reward, it was a right. And where a black woman didn't just walk into a boardroom. She rebuilt it from the inside out. Michelle Reed's story reminds us that true leadership is not about wielding power, it's about using it to lift others. In a world quick to judge and slow to listen, she chose to lead with courage, integrity, and grace. Let her journey be a mirror, and a call to action. Because when we challenge systems built on silence, and replace them with truth, respect, and accountability, we don't just change companies. We change lives. What would you do if someone tried to shut the door on your future? Tell us in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe to True Echo for more stories that fight back against injustice, with dignity, power, and hope.